Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Hard Time, which is episode 13 of season 4 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as requested by my viewers. This episode was requested by Peter Rogers. So Hard Time is the episode that begins with O'Brien as an old man in the prison cell who apparently has been incarcerated for 20 years. We then flash to the present where Kira is with present-day O'Brien after undergoing a procedure by these strange aliens where they implanted memory of O'Brien being in prison for 20 years as a sentence for crimes of espionage. O'Brien returns to the station and tries to resume life as normal, but is haunted by these memories of being in that cell for 20 years, which we get told in a series of flashbacks. O'Brien insists that he was alone during that time, but in the flashbacks we learn he indeed had a cellmate named Ikar who still haunts him and visions in present times. O'Brien slowly starts to unravel as he refuses to see the counselor that he has been ordered to see. He yells at Bashir and is overall short-tempered, which leads to him assaulting Quark, which forces Sisko's hand as he takes him off duty and orders him to report to daily counseling sessions. This causes O'Brien to lose it, and when he returns home, he loses his temper with Molly and nearly hits her. Being devastated by his behavior, he goes to a cargo bay, gets out a phaser, and contemplates suicide. Bashir finds him there and attempts to talk him down, which is where he finally reveals the existence of his cellmate Ikar, and that he killed Ikar because he mistakenly thought he was hiding food from him, leading to extreme survivor's guilt. And even though he knows these memories aren't real, since they were designed based off of his personality, he believes he is unworthy and would act the same way in reality. However, Bashir manages to talk him down, and the episode ends with him agreeing to these counseling sessions and returning home to his family and appreciating what he has. So I think the best way to describe the fan reaction to this episode is polarized, as I heard some refer to this as one of the worst episodes of Deep Space Nine and bring it up as an example of when the show falters, and I heard others refer to this as one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine and using this example of how emotionally powerful and meaningful this show is. Personally, I lay somewhere in between, as I do think there are elements of this episode that are very powerful and touch on issues like PTSD and how traumatic events can have lasting effects on people. But on the other hand, there are many flaws in this episode, and oftentimes they do this powerful message a disservice by coming off as kind of artificial and contrived. The biggest issue that I have with this episode is how it doesn't at all connect up to the rest of the series. Deep Space Nine is often celebrated as the most serialized of all the Star Trek series for being one of the first shows on television to actually do this serialized format. However, this episode is very episodic and has flaws that come in that format. For example, the aliens in this episode that do the treatment to O'Brien were never seen before or again and are just some generic aliens. In fact, the issues around O'Brien's arrest and sentencing and how this may affect relations between the Federation and these aliens were never even slightly addressed. And more importantly, O'Brien's treatment in this episode was shown, and rightfully so, to have a deep impact on his character, but it then was never even touched on in the slightest again, which ultimately undercuts the whole meaning of this episode, which is that traumatic events can have lasting effects on people. And yet, as soon as this episode is finished, it's like it never happened. In fact, I would say this episode is much more powerful if you watch it as a standalone episode out of context, as I did for this review. However, when I originally saw this episode, it was a part of Season 4. It seemed really out of place, unnecessary, and forgettable, particularly in the context of Season 4, which this episode adds absolutely nothing to overall. Other issues is the entire concept of this episode isn't really plausible, as the treatment O'Brien receives as a sentence for crimes of espionage seems incredibly ineffective, as the main point of incarcerating criminals isn't to cause them trauma, and unfortunately, particularly in today's modern society in which the aliens in this episode seem to be based off of, it's not to rehabilitate them either. However, as a form of rehabilitation, this treatment sucks, as it just causes them to have suicidal PTSD. But the main reason for incarcerating criminals, unfortunately, tends to be to keep them away from society so they cannot cause further damage, which this type of sentence does absolutely nothing to address. Because we, the viewer, know O'Brien is innocent, the effects it has on him take on a different meaning, but try to imagine this treatment being used on someone who actually was guilty and had no remorse over what they did doesn't seem like it would be that effective. In the Voyager episode Ex Post Facto, an alien race also used memory implants as a prison sentence, but the one in that episode was much more believable, as they would force the convicted offender to relive the last moments of their victim's life that they killed on a regular basis, which would be more in keeping with society's need for justice for the family's victims and the need to punish those for committing such acts by forcing them to feel the weight of what they have done, which is basically what we do in modern day society with the death penalty. The other issue that I had is, even though overall I felt O'Brien's most post-traumatic stress caused by these implants weren't only realistic but also an important message, at times the way this was illustrated in the show was clunky and unrealistic, such as when O'Brien reached across the bar and grabbed Quark for taking too long to serve his drink, and O'Brien seemed incredibly lucid when threatening Quark. I just didn't buy this at all, and how the incident that ultimately sent O'Brien to wanting to kill himself was when he yelled at Molly. And the whole way that scene played out seemed really contrived, like it felt scripted. This is how someone who is writing a script would describe an incident like this, not how an incident like this would actually play out in real life. Plus, the whole suicide attempt didn't seem particularly earned either. However, there were strengths to this episode, such as the character of HR, who was very nicely executed all around, and was a nice sort of way, had this wise and calm sort of characteristic about him that you would believe O'Brien would become good friends with. And you also really bought the conflicts between them at the end. And the scenes in which he would appear as a vision in present times were really powerful, as he warned O'Brien against the downward spiral that he was on. And as I said, I felt this episode did a great job of relaying the importance of how traumatic events can have lasting effects on one's psyche, and it was even more powerful that they used O'Brien to pull this off, as he is the one character who is the most relatable character on the show and is pretty much the everyman of Deep Space Nine. So apparently this episode was originally pitched during the first season of Deep Space Nine, and was pitched again in the second season, and then pitched yet again in the third season. Each time it was rejected by Michael Piller, who apparently did not like the idea of this episode. However, in season 4, Michael Piller was no longer there, and it was Stephen R. Ribera who approved the scripts, and he finally approved this one. Personally, I think this episode would have worked much better had it been in season 1, as for one, they were still establishing the characters at that point, and that season was more episodic in nature than the other seasons were, so it wouldn't have felt as out of place, and that season was a bit too white bread and silly, and would have benefited more from some more serious, dark episodes like this one. And the ultimate shooting script for this episode took elements from several different story ideas, one of them being an episode that never got made, where the character of Ensign Sito, who was shown in the Next Generation episodes The First Duty and Lower Decks, who was presumed killed by the Cardassians at the end of that last episode she appeared in, was found to be alive and had lived in a Cardassian prison, and when they recovered her, she was suffering from PTSD because she had killed her cellmate whom she had befriended over a misunderstanding. And personally, that episode idea sounds much better to me than this one, because it would have fit so much better with the established lore by making the Cardassians the perpetrators and not some convenient one-off alien. And because it would be a side character and not a main character, they could pull it off that this would have lasting effects on this character and not have this undercut by the fact that it's never mentioned again in the series. Plus, it would have been great to get some follow-up to Lower Decks, and Ensign Sito has that episode made her a very interesting character, so it would have been great to see some follow-up on her character. So honestly, I think they should have went with that idea, and that they chose poorly by doing this episode instead, but that's just me. So my rating for Hard Time out of 10 is a 5 average. At times, it's a very powerful episode telling a very relevant and necessary story about the dangers of PTSD, and it gets you to understand this issue better. However, this powerful message is undercut by the way it sometimes is clunkily executed, and the fact that everything involved in it instantly disappears after this episode ends, which basically says that PTSD will simply disappear after a couple of weeks, which isn't the right message to send. So that's it for my review of Hard Time. If there's an episode from any of the 5 Star Trek series you'd like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episode you'd like me to review, but please, only 1 episode request per person, and be advised, since I'm so backed up, I won't be able to get to any new episode review requests for several months. But be sure to check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as many other videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Mr. Robot, Dark Matter, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.